When I identify as a victim, I'm no longer looking to learn, which is what this original purpose of regret was. What could I have done differently? Because if I'm a blamer now and I'm a victim, it's like, what could you have done differently? You should go change. I'm no longer learning from this experience. And that is a cultural shift. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast, where we explore the strengths and challenges of being simply human. I'm Christina Caro, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Karen Lee Linsky, leadership and self-trust coach.
Today, we are going to be talking about regret, which is that awful mixture of disappointment, grief, shame, guilt, remorse, and sometimes even powerlessness and panic. And it is a feeling when you wish that you've done something different, but believe it is, quote, too late. So while it has the potential to help us learn moving forward, instead it tends to keep us stuck in the past and feeling bad about ourselves. It can be this catalyst for avoidance behavior, which is what we have been exploring in the last few episodes. So we start avoiding the pain, avoiding the guilt and the shame. We might be avoiding taking personal responsibility for whatever it is, the action that triggered the regret. And so then we end up stuck, like how we got in this mess in the first place. So before we dive in, I want to thank everyone for helping us reach our first milestone of 100 subscribers. We are deeply honored and grateful and appreciate your helping us reach the next milestone by giving us a thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, and sharing with friends and family who might benefit from this episode.
I picked this topic because regret used to completely control my life. I leave meetings thinking, I can't believe I said this as a consultant, or carry guilt from things that happened decades ago, like 40 years ago, like something from my high school prom that I still regret doing, but that's another story for another day. But over the past 3 years, I've been changing my response to regret. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. It's okay to feel regret as long as you learn from it, instead of always beating yourself up for it. Maybe you are like I was, or maybe it doesn't resonate with you. But likely you know someone who might be having this relationship with regret, because it's such a shared human experience.
Well, Karen, when you say regret used to control you, like what did that look like day to day?
I used to get in this cycle, this terrible cycle. Like right after meeting, I think, shoot, I shouldn't have said that, and feel so embarrassed. It's like the regret became this huge monster that made me feel so small and stupid again and again and again. It's like the thing I talked about at my prom. I have said something mean to someone because he was my prom date actually. And I felt like I ruined his whole date. And I carried that guilt literally for decades. And I even thought about sending him an apology letter. And then my husband, my best friend, all these people were saying, you don't need to do that. It's just, don't regret that. It's like he's over it. I'm sure he's over it. But here's the trap. I got so stuck feeling ashamed for things that happened a long, long time ago, instead of learning anything useful from it and just moving on. So, Christina, tell me, why do our brains do this to us? And what is actually happening when we get stuck in regret?
Okay, this is a great question, Karen. So our brains are actually trying to help us. And we've talked about this in many different difficult emotions. If we start learning to say, why is this happening? How is my brain starting to help me? That's going to be the first step. The problem is that the brain is trying to help us in a primitive way that isn't working well in our modern life. So a way to think about this is way back when we were living in the cave, if you made a mistake that got you kicked out of the tribe, you literally could die.
Right.
We are social beings, and particularly from our primitive brain, we needed to live in groups for our shared survival. So our brain developed this thing where it replays our mistakes over and over, asking, what if I had done differently? Because the brain is trying to make sure we don't mess up again, and does this by engaging in a replay. And by replaying, we're actually strengthening what's called neural pathways. So that's the hard wiring, and it's associated with better decision makings for future similar situations. And it also serves as this social function because, well, it's kind of what you were just talking about. When we express regret to others for whatever the offense was, it signals that we recognize our mistake and are unlikely to repeat it. And that helps maintain relationships and group cohesion. So it's interesting that your instinct, like you had the instinct there, Karen. It's like, I need to write an apology letter. Yes, that's when the brain is working well. This regret, it's actually a motivator for what we call repair behavior. So remember, the brain is trying to make sure that we don't get kicked out of the cave because then
Mm.
we'll die. And so maybe a way to think about it is regret is like a mental bookmark
Oh, I
to
like that.
help us make better choices in the future. Like okay,
Mm.
note to self.
I
That didn't
love
work.
that. I love that. That's great.
Yeah, and our problem in the modern world is that this innate process,
Mm,
it's not always working
mhm.
optimally because when our brain treats an embarrassing moment, like whatever happened at the prom, in the same way that it is treating a life or death situation, right? It floods you with these bad feelings and keeps replaying the scene, even though really nobody's going to die from an awkward comment. Like it's not going to get you thrown out of the cave, but we have a primitive brain that is still interpreting that way and flooding us with these bad feelings that in our modern world can actually lead to shutdown because
Mm.
and avoidance. And this is where it ties to avoidance
Mm.
because remember, our brain is wired to remember painful experiences more than positive experience. And I've often frame it as the brain is designed to notice a saber-toothed tiger in the grass, not all the daisies in the grass.
That's
So
true.
it's going to keep orienting. So
It's
make
true.
you might make 10 great decisions that turn out just fine, but it's that one questionable one that the brain is going to hook into because it's like, oh, that's the saber-toothed tiger in the grass.
So, do you think our culture today is making this worse?
I absolutely think that it is.
I do
And
too.
partly there are many things in our modern culture that is making it hard. One, we are not technically living in a cave together. So, right, Karen, you go to work and say something happens that you have regret, but you're actually gone home into your own cave where you're safe. So, there's confusion about normally it would be I make this mistake, I feel this regret, and I need to stay in the cave. So, I am going to go make that repair. But
Right.
we're all separated from each other, or you and I, we work remotely. We're not even going to pass that person, by the water cooler. We don't have that opportunity. We don't have that normal drive anymore, but we're still stuck with these painful feelings. And now we're trying to figure out what do I do with these painful feelings? Or
Mm.
maybe we're making decisions, but we're seeing people that we see like ourselves on social media and they're curating. They're only posting like the best version or some curated version. And people can't seem to stop but engage in comparison. And so now there's a
Mm.
generation of artificial regret that may not have been there, but because I'm comparing to somebody else, like, oh, well, I should have done that instead, or I should have gone and done that trip, or I should have bought that car, or I should have done that weight loss like there's all this regret because I'm
Yeah.
looking at social media and comparing myself. And no matter what I do, there's all this I should have been, I should have done, I should have regret, 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 regret. So now our brain is just flooded with these difficult feelings, and we don't know how to get out of it because of comparison, regret. We're not as together as we used to be. So there are many, many factors. And we're also a bit more of a society when you think about our culture, at least here in the United States. What I see is becoming more and more of a blame and victim society. There's always these grievances, and I'm a victim, victim, victim. When I identify as a victim, I'm no longer looking to learn, which is what this original purpose of regret was. What could I have done differently? Because if I'm a blamer now and I'm a victim, it's like, what could you have done differently? You should go change. I'm no longer learning from this experience. And that is a
Wow.
cultural shift than, say, 40 years ago that I
Wow.
do believe is really changing this dynamic.
Wow. I love that insight that you're sharing. All those insights. Wow. It's so real. It's kind of scary too, but it's so true.
But Karen, so on your own journey, so you've been working on this now in this culture. So
Yeah.
how can people tell when they've moved from that normal regret, that healthy purpose of regret, to something that's harmful? Can you share your experience and what people could be looking for?
I think it's what you said earlier. I make judgment against my own self, right? That it's good or it's bad. So let me try and make example was there are definitely some clear warning signs. What I ended up doing is avoiding situations where I thought I might make a wrong choice, or I might notice that there's a really mean voice saying, I can't believe I did that. You are so stupid, you know? And it's like when I mess up a conflict with someone and then spending months avoiding a family gathering because I was embarrassed of something that happened, like reconnecting with my sister-in-law after my brother died. I mean, there was a conflict with my sister-in-law and I messed up and I just avoided some, I didn't even contact her. Then we made up. So things are really, really good. But I think the point is the regret can get even bigger at sometimes. I wanted to bring this up because I think in today's environment right now, when there's a lot of uncertainty and, I'm at retirement age and, I started to regret that. Why did I stay at my first job for 25 years? Or I even thought, oh, maybe I wish I would have married someone different. That was like earlier, but still, sometimes you think like that. And I used to have this fantasy that if I made a different choice, then somehow I'd have a perfect life. And if I left CSC, it would have been so much greater, it would make so much money. But that's not necessarily true. And I remember you helping me, and I also therapist had to bring it up again, help me realize that even those what I think might have been perfect decisions or perfect lives, if I chose a different path, would still have their own problems. It's not like I lived in happy land and, who knows, right? And so it's interesting that I had to remember that every choice comes with trade-offs because there's no such thing as a perfect life. That's what I've also learned is how to spot the difference. So healthy regret feels more like curiosity. What can I learn here? But it has an end point instead of me cycling, right? The toxic regret feels heavy. It keeps looking backwards and it goes back in circles and never stops because you haven't like put an end to the point to say, what did I learn to move on? And also your body will tell you healthy reflection, you feel open, excited. But when you're toxic regret, it feels so tight, like it brings me so down.
Well, can you give like a specific example, say from the work? Because I know you work primarily with leaders in a corporate environment. And so how would this show up in that environment?
So this is one that I see time and time again. So let me give you a client story, and it's one of many clients, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this outside too, who are listening to this podcast. So I work with a client who is a brilliant technical expert. They love solving the complex problems and working directly with clients on technical solutions. But in their company, the only way to get promoted and make more money was move into management, right? And we've often seen technical people move into management, and then we realize they really aren't good managers. So They took the manager job because they thought I should want the promotion, right? There's a little bit that says I'm going to get away with my technical work, but the promotion, the status, the bigger salary, this is what I should do. This is what culturally I'm excited to say. I'm a manager of this group, but they were so miserable because
Right.
instead of doing the technical work that they loved, focusing on, even like the be able to meet with the client and do the technical work. That's where they get their juices from, the technical work plus meet with the client. Now they're stuck in internal meetings, dealing with performance issues, doing the administrative task all day. And they were able to do some technical work, but not to the degree that they were able to do. They weren't responsible for solving the technical problems, right?
Right.
And that was part of the problem, So, of course, they regretted the decision because once they realized that, but here's where they got stuck. Instead of learning from it, they kept beating themselves up. They said, I should still be grateful for this opportunity, and everybody expects me to want this promotion. And I did it. And what's wrong with me?
Right.
I should like being a manager. It's not something that I shouldn't like, right? What's wrong with me that I don't even like being a manager? And they'd spent like 2 years in regret loops. And then when we spoke, they kept feeling external pressure to move up. And the internal truth that they were forgetting was they love the technical work. And the problems regret became this constant background noise of I made the wrong choice, but I can't admit it because everyone will think I'm not ambitious. And who in our society doesn't want to be viewed as ambitious? So it wasn't until we worked together more closely and they began to realize that the regret was actual valuable information. It was telling them something important about their values and what energized them. Because once they stopped judging the regret and started listening to it, they were able to negotiate a technical leadership position that actually gave them the growth and compensation they wanted while keeping them close to the work they love. And so it left them an opening because they realized. And then I think that's the beauty of it is it's not just shows you down and they can't make more money and all stuff. When they had that honest discussion with the management, they were able to get what they wanted, but no one thought about that. So that's the exciting part.
Karen, and that was really similar. I worked with an entire group of mid-level managers who had exactly this regret you're describing. And this solution is what came up was that the company needed to come up with a technical leadership track because they were moving all these technical people into people management. And it was just really sad. I had one of them wrote an email to me saying, well, we'd like to be good managers. We're just not. So
I'm just not good at it.
Yeah. And being able to be honest with yourself and really question that societal pressure too. Like this equals your success, this equals you're lazy. There's something wrong with you if you don't want to pursue this hamster wheel. So I think a lot of my work is helping people recognize they're in regret. Matter of fact, I think that in some ways, the symptoms of regret that I mentioned in the beginning, shame, guilt, emotional pain, anxiety, sadness, that is often the catalyst that will bring someone to seek out therapy. So there's a lot of different ways for you folks who maybe you're not in the corporate environment, but you're starting to reflect on, is regret something that I'm dealing with in my life? Is that what's driving me? So I thought it might be helpful to list out the top 10 regrets that just we as people tend to fall into. And there's many, many, many more, but I just wanted to focus on the ones that I see over and over and over again. So one of them is not expressing feelings or resolving conflicts. So we've talked about that when you avoid conflict, it's just a temporary fix and often escalates. But it's also not expressing feelings. It might be not expressing love for somebody, and it's the one who got away. So people often will regret what they didn't say as much as what they did say.
Wow, that's a great point.
Yeah, and especially if you experience, say, losing someone. I was very lucky to have managers when I was in my mid-20s, my second real job, and my managers were actually retired already from their first career, and this is the second one. They had this wisdom they brought. So here I am in my 20s, and they would keep saying, Christina, live your life to minimize regrets. Think about when you're 80 years old and you look back, will you regret this choice? So they gave me this way to look at current choices from this perspective of, will I regret this? And one of the things for me was I never wanted to feel that I didn't say I love value to the people I care about.
Mm.
Because I didn't want to be on my deathbed with that regret. Another regret is, and I have this one, staying too long in an unfulfilling relationship, but it could also
Mm.
be staying too long in an unfulfilling job. And Karen, you mentioned that about,
Mhm.
20 years, 25 years, wishing that maybe you should have left earlier. Another common regret, not taking care of your health when you're younger.
Oh, that's me right now.
Yeah, Karen and I are now entering our 6th decade, and this is definitely when all those times in the past when we were younger, all those reckless decisions that ended up in, oh, I just broke my bone. No worries, I'm going to heal. It starts showing up at this point. You start having achy bones and
Mm.
arthritis, or you haven't been eating healthy and now you're pre-diabetic. Like all of these things, like it's so much harder when you wait until now.
Yep.
And you look back, you're, "Oh, if I would have just made these choices when I was younger." Another top one is caution, playing it too safe. And this is where we've been diving into avoidance, making our world
Mhm.
smaller and smaller. So not being able to take those reasonable risks because of avoidance and over caution and low risk tolerance. And then you end up with regrets later of all the things you didn't do. We talked
Yep.
about looking for the grief trail, all those experiences of loss and existential loss, losing touch with important friendships. And
Mm.
especially in our busy world, people will have regret around that, not spending enough quality time with family. That's been a real challenge. I believe that men feel this too, but I hear it more from women who feel they are missing out on particularly their children's early
Mm.
years
Mhm.
because of being at work. And I think for women tend to be more sensitive and aware, but I'm telling you, I have heard just as much regret from fathers
Mm.
who
Totally
really
agree.
just, yeah, they didn't feel that they had a choice. And yet they just sort of keep that regret to themselves as just a part of life. But I do think it needs to be acknowledged. There's working too much in general. And not having that work-life balance, not taking that vacation, not going to that dinner invitation with friends because I'm too busy, I have to reach this deadline. This is one, not pursuing education,
Mm.
like dropping out of college, not finishing college, or just finishing high school for different reasons. And some of the reasons I hear are, it might have been a financial situation, but they're still carrying that regret as a personal failure. And I will look at it and say, wait, you're having a lot of this guilt and regret, but I'm looking at what you ended up doing that should actually be so proud of yourself because you were swimming upstream the whole time. So instead of being able to see that success, they're still, like you said, stuck in that past and hooked and stuck into the regret. There's also the last couple ones. These are big. And this is why I say them for the last ones. Caring too much about others' opinions.
Ah, that's a big
It's
one.
a huge one.
The big one.
Big one. People make major life decisions based on external validation or what they think other people think. Like you're describing those leaders who like are going to be judged if they don't pursue this career path, even though it makes
Yeah.
you totally unhappy. Or even who you marry. Oh, who my parents were going to approve of, or where you lived, or the career that you took. When those are all driven by caring too much about other people's opinions, there is a deep existential regret that really shows up as depression and despair, hopelessness, trapped, even substance abuse to numb the feeling of it. And so that's a lot of work we have to do, is learning not to put so much weight on that external validation, what other people think. And then finally, and it's connected to this last one of not being true to yourself and living according to other people's expectations rather than discovering and pursuing what is authentic for you. Karen, and I think you can see how this ties into imposter
Oh my
syndrome.
gosh, yes, yes.
Right?
It feels like my life that was all of my life, the last 2 especially.
Yeah, I
But it's
think
okay,
imposter
we've talked about
syndrome
it before.
is filled with, like, if you have imposter syndrome, you probably know the feeling of regret very intimately.
Definitely. That's definitely.
So I don't know if you could see, but and I'll put this list into the show notes, but regrets do seem to cluster around relationship,
Mm-hmm.
authenticity, and missed opportunities rather than regrets around the more material things or achievements. It's actually pursuing the achievement that tends to cause regret if it's not aligned with who we are authentically. So it's really important to really take some time, go into the show notes, look at this list, and really challenge yourself to reflect on, wow, have I fallen into these patterns? And I'm so used to swimming in regret that it's just my norm. And I hadn't really thought about whether or not there's an alternative to just being stuck in regret. And Karen, this is something that you've worked on. So why don't you share with us how you changed your relationship with regret and what was your turning point?
The big moment was realizing that I made always the best decision I could with what I knew at that time. So when I shared my thoughts in a meeting, I realized that I'm offering my perspective. And that's what I'm actually paid to share is my point of view, right? It doesn't have to land perfectly, but I had to share my perspective. I don't need to be embarrassed about my perspective. And maybe I could have said it differently because of what I know now. So instead of regret being proof that I am bad at making decisions, it just became information. So instead of saying I'm terrible at this, it became, what does this teach me for the next time? What happens now when regret shows up? And sure, I still notice it sometimes, but it doesn't like grab me and like grip me and like what let go because I was in a shame spiral. So now I can pause and think, okay, what was I trying to do here? What can I learn? I trust I'm trying to do good things. So regret becomes a good information. My intention has always been good, right? I'm not doing it to hurt anybody intentionally or whatever. And I just had to get away from regret is proving that I'm a bad person. And what I liked, what we've shared a lot recently is about that choice point model that you taught us in the avoidance episodes. That's perfect for this.
Oh, I mean, let me just stop and think about that for a second. And folks, I'm going to throw the model up here if you are watching on YouTube, and if you are listening audio, I just try to describe this model for you because let's sort of take a look and see how it applies to regret. So with the choice point model, it comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. We covered it in the last episode and we'll put a link to it below. But you think about it as there being a choice point that is typically the moment of difficult thoughts and feelings. So you're in this moment of struggle. And now in that moment of struggle, how you respond to those difficult thoughts and feelings creates a choice. And you can either choose path A, which is move away from the pain, move away quick. And that could be numbing, that can be deflecting, that could be blaming. It's anything to quickly get out of the difficult experience, but tends to cause future problems. So it might feel better in the minute because I just blamed someone else or I deflected. And so for a moment, I'm free of the difficult feelings, but then it just creates more problems and more regret when I look back on how I reacted. It's probably going to trigger more shame, more guilt, just another moment of difficult experience.
Yes.
So then on the other hand, on the model, you could take path B, we call that the towards path, and that is to stop, align with a value. And when it comes to regret, what I recommend is when you start to recognize that regret is there to trigger a process of curiosity and learning. So we feel the difficult emotion and we choose to move towards curiosity and learning. And I think with regret, because it has so much to do with social relationships and fear of rupturing it, probably self-compassion as well to dial down the fear of being thrown out of the cage. So we reorient, I'm going to be compassionate with myself. Let me learn from this experience. Then that leads us towards taking actions that align with our values. That might be going back to someone and making amends, taking personal responsibility, fixing a problem that might have resulted from whatever the initial choice that created the difficult feelings or the regrets, taking a new path. If my regret was that I didn't finish school, well, maybe I go back and get my GRE, and I finish school. We decide what is it that I really want, and we realign and we move in that direction. So the magic question is what I'm doing with this regret right now helping me grow and move towards a life that I want? Or is it keeping me stuck in the past or keeping me in a loop of not helpful behaviors that's just creating more regret?
Yeah, that is the magic question. I'm glad you call it the magic question because it is. And so when I think about it in regards to what it could look like step by step. So what's important is this regret. Now, the most important thing is it's important that you know this regret without being mean to yourself about it. And that's sometimes the hardest because you have that internal critic going on.
Okay.
And then remember what you actually knew at that time when you made that decision and not what you know right now. Like that's the problem because we're talking about what we know right now. We think I should have known, right? And then you have to ask, what does this teach you? What's the lesson here? And then decide how to use this wisdom going forward, right? Or maybe it's like you said, you put that mental bookmark. I love that idea, that mental bookmark. Love that. And then you take your action based on your values that we talked a little bit about, right? But what's the lesson and not your regret. And when you have this, another thing I've done is instead of saying this is what happened to me, when I used to have this brain that would say, I can't believe I did this. You have to change that language to what was I trying to accomplish? Or I'm so stupid. And then you say, what did I learn about myself? Now, another one is I should have known better. Now I know this for next time. And so what I had to actually do was put it in sticky words. So I've learned that when I have these prompts of what I used to, and if I had these, like not sticky words, but like, those 3 M6, I write it out, my prompt, right? I would write on it to see what was I trying to accomplish? And that way, when I started to have this mental discussion with myself, I can't believe I did that. I can look at that note that said, what was I trying to accomplish? So it became a little bit easier for me so I could start to change my language to myself. So Christina, is there some experiences that you want to share from your work?
In terms of how to work with this, it just brings up a memory of this one client who had a lot of different regrets because she didn't have a strong sense of herself. And so what would happen is when she would be around other people, she would literally lose contact with her sense of self. And she kind of had this unconscious chameleon thing that would happen where she would almost immediately, whatever was happening around her, that's what she did. And then later, when she was away from the group, she would come back to herself and every single thing she did or said, because it wasn't really connected consciously to herself, she would be full of guilt, shame, embarrassment, confusion. Like, why did I say I would do X? Why did I hook up with that person? Like she would have no sense. It would just be overwhelmed with so much confusion and guilt that she started to develop what looked like a depressive disorder and a really severe anxiety disorder. Because it undermined her sense of self-trust. If she couldn't be herself and show up for herself, then she didn't know what would happen. And she had panic attacks. And it was just so it was really, really hard. So what we did is we had to first work on helping her develop a strong connection with her in what I call the inner compass. And that's within the body. Some people call it their gut sense. Or I always ask people, where do they feel it? Some people feel it up in their heart. Some people feel it in their gut. But it's that signal, going back to the primitive brain, that's always trying to lead us in the right direction when we look inward. So this is that connection to regret when people are habitually looking outward and looking for that external validation, or what do other people think that I should do, is like a muscle that's underused. The connection to the inner compass becomes atrophied, and then it can't guide, like that choice point decision. There's no connection anymore to those sense of values. So it's almost always the away moves instead of towards the value. So we have to first find the inner compass, build the inner compass by getting some clarity around, where do I have strong feelings that are values based, that feel like me? What do I feel like? Who am I? What would I do in a vacuum where I didn't worry about anybody else? What would be the choices? So we work on building that inner compass, and then we learn to recognize that the moment to turn towards the inner compass is that moment of discomfort. So instead of an instant desire to flee from the discomfort, you start to reframe it as, discomfort is an opportunity for me to go connect with my inner compass and start minimizing those regrets. So it's an opportunity instead of pain to flee. And then over
Mm.
time, it was so beautiful to watch her say, "Oh, my inner compass is the size of a cue ball. I can feel it now." And
Ooh,
as it
that's
grew,
cute.
it was so it's I had such a strong visual. She was really visual.
Yeah.
And then over time, she got really consistent. Discomfort, go inside.
Cool.
Discomfort, go inside. And then what happened, Karen, says you're a self-trust coach, is she started to see how connected it was to self-trust because
Yep.
now she was connecting and making decisions from herself instead of abandoning herself unconsciously because she was looking outwards and just taking her cues from her environment that may have been completely opposite of really what her inner compass wanted her to do. So as
Yeah.
she got more consistent with it, it developed that sense of self-trust. Then, like I said, Karen, I think that that really aligns with the work that you've been doing for yourself, but also your passion in helping other people. So maybe if you could help us wrap this up, what do you think the takeaway is for our audience, and how can they start bringing awareness to how regret can become a teacher instead of a punisher?
I think it's really, I want people to start recognizing that when you made that choice that you tend to regret, you were making the best choice you could with what you knew or had at that moment. And that's not making excuses for that. That's just being human. So, the homework that I would have you consider doing is to think about one thing you've been regretting for a long time. And can you figure out what you're trying to protect or accomplish with that choice? And what would it feel to forgive yourself and just focus on what you learned? And forgiving yourself is the biggest thing, and just focus on what you learned. And so, when I want you also to remember that when you stop beating yourself up for being just human, you can free up all this energy to making better choices going forward. And that honestly is the real gift, Christina.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And matter of fact, my dad gave me that same advice to always look at things like that was the
Wow.
best decision you made with the information available. Like 2020 hindsight should be something we learn from, not beat ourselves up with. And I think a lot of people use 2020 hindsight, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, and they miss the point. They beat themselves up.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, through all of this, our audience, you can see that learning to have a better relationship with regret will connect you to trusting yourself. Because when we stop beating ourselves up with that 2020 hindsight, and stop beating ourselves up for making normal human mistakes, we actually get to become better learners, and then we'll make better decisions in the future. So if you found this helpful, again, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with friends who might need to hear it. And share with us what resonated for you in the comments. Perhaps share a regret that you were finally able to turn around and learn from. And you can do it in the comments, or you can email it to us at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com. And until next time, stay curious and kind to yourself, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.